we often don't know best. In so many areas, nature is adapting, coping, inventing and moving on. Conservationists, by and large, can't cope with this and seem to be in denial. Let me give you examples. These are little examples, but they're little examples of something that I believe is a fundamental tidal wave that is sweeping the planet. Inside my house, geckos colonise areas on walls and eat house insects. And I'm not in the tropics where these things are everywhere. And yes, we did create gaps in the walls for them to come in. Huntsman spiders also colonise our walls and eat insects. Perrin's tree frogs, I've said colonise our bathroom. They're in the loo. They're the whitewater sports frogs. When you flush, they're having a pretty interesting time, but they appear back up, and they live beside the vanity cupboard in the bathroom. Outside, spiders have adapted to web across our windows to catch insects attracted by our lights. Small, and this is an incredible one, small insectivorous birds, including pardalotes, have learned to hunt insects in the dead of night around our dichroic garden lights. 2 o'clock in the morning, if we've got a party going on for a while, if the red wine holds, 2 o'clock in the morning, we'll see them hovering around the lights, eating moths that are attracted to garden lights. It's extraordinary stuff. We have finches eating our, and I'd like to point out, intentionally planted garden weeds. Double bars and red-headed finches eat panic veld grass and guinea grass. We planted all those. We have, I'm talking thousands of these finches around our area now. They weren't there at all when we arrived. We have countless frogs in our fish ponds. When I visited the town of Theodore in Queensland, do any of you know where Theodore is? Good. I suppose the conservationists would say, oh, you know, what a dreadful place bloody Theodore is. Cotton. And I suppose conventional wisdom would say in the conservation areas that that's a terrible, nasty monoculture with toxic chemicals and so on. Yet vast clouds of zebra and other finches were there. They were living there. And I thought, I've got to work this out because it's cotton farms as far as the eye can see. And when I searched out the area, they were feeding again on guinea grass and they were doing very well. This is a weed. Or at least it's a weed to some people. I've seen red-rumped grass parrots. Wait for this one. We just finished a backyard blitz sort of yesterday at the Children's Hospital in Westmead in Sydney, which is pretty close to the bullseye. You know, if you fired a bullet through the middle of Sydney, that's pretty close. And there were red-rumped grass parrots in the grounds of the hospital eating bread scraps and competing against feral sparrows and pigeons. And I went, yeah! What a superb future Australia could have if our wildlife adapts to our cities, suburbs and farms. Yet, when we help the wildlife to hang on while they learn the new landscape, some environmental groups, for example wires, who do a wonderful job picking up sick animals, but they've got some silly bits about them. Groups like Wires say you shouldn't put seed out for finches. Well, how on earth do the poor little buggers have enough time to cope if we don't? How else do they hang on to their traditional territory if we've removed their food plants or mowed off the seed heads from those food plants? How else do they have time to adapt? Conservation groups don't seem to be able to cope with this at all. Rainbow lorikeets now exist in vast numbers right up and down, particularly the east coast of Australia, in our nectar-laden gardens. There's far more of these beautiful birds now than when Captain Cook arrived. And I'd argue you should all read Tim Lowe's excellent book, Feral Future, to get a better grip on these sorts of issues. That is the changing face of Australia. Now the tough bit. It's called a least worst outcome. Excuse the bad grammar. Sometimes the best you can do is to achieve a less worse outcome. When I realised that agricultural and veterinary chemicals were creating serious environmental and human health issues in Australia, I approached the then Minister for Primary Industry, Simon Crean, to set up a national group to better manage chemicals in Australia. He did set that group up. It's now the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. We did manage to get rid of the organochlorines, DDT and its relatives. Now, by the way, I accept that in Australia you would get rid of them because they have been proven to be stored in body fats in humans. I take it most of you understand what a half-life is. Things like chlordane have a half-life of about 15 years. So if you've got 10 times too much of that in your body, and women are particularly prone to store these things in their good bits, boobs and bottoms, they're stored in fat. If you had 10 times too much in your body fat, in 15 years it would drop to 5 times too much. in 30 years to 2.5 times too much. So I think you're getting some idea of just the time frame. I don't want those things in our bodies. But if I was living in Africa, particularly in the malaria zones, of course you'd say, well, we might have to put up with it a while till we find a better way of beating the mosquitoes that spread malaria. But in Australia, we don't want that here. We brought this group together. We managed to reduce a lot of the chemicals that we were worried about, find better ones, and also find yet less uses often for them. We also recognise, however, that clearly agricultural chemicals ensure high yields in agriculture and are also necessary for disease prevention. I suppose the point that struck me about it, that really teed me off, is that when we were forming that group, and then when I went on to be a board member for many years, did any of the environmental groups work with us? No. Did any of them offer support? No. Did any of them help? No. Sometimes the best you can do is to make things less worse. If you perceive a problem with chemicals, if you think an ideal world is one without all these agricultural chemicals, the realistic way to approach that is to say, well, how do we make it a little bit less worse? Because you have to have those chemicals. Everything has a downside. Many of you would have come here in some sort of motor vehicle, bus, car or whatever. They kill people. Of course they do, but you wouldn't outlaw cars. So the fact that conservation groups traditionally wouldn't get involved in something like that, I think, is tragic, because that side of the equation is never being put in those groups. That's unacceptable. We need to be all together to look at these things. You don't just leave it to one group in society. I live in hope of a new era where environmental groups see themselves as part of a cooperative community operation to save the planet. The key to all of this is compromise and goodwill. This is the role of the Australian Environment Foundation wishes to play, in my view. If any of you want to challenge that today, God bless you. I don't mean I'm going to challenge you, I mean let's work it out amongst ourselves. We're concerned that scare tactics around nuclear energy, genetic engineering and cloning are used to befuddle the public. Sweeping statements such as we're fishing out our oceans cloud the real issue of the management of our oceans, both in terms of the ecosystem and also of sustainable fish harvest. All of these emotionally charged approaches tend to force environmentalists into camps at war with industries and governments, then nobody wins. We want to put together environmentalists, scientists, farmers, developers, miners, government representatives and all stakeholders, including members of the public, into a collaborative group to address issues rationally. We wish to use accurate data, research information, economic aspects and human issues to create truly a sustainable future for our planet. Above and beyond everything else, we don't have, and this is the critical bit if you want to know who we are, above and beyond everything else, we do not have any beliefs or agendas beyond that of achieving the best possible collaborative outcome for our planet. We don't have the religious zeal of a lot of these conservationist groups or whatever. We don't have that background. There's somebody much better than me coming, so I'm going to get on. Thank you all very much.